Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Kevin shares with us his path from a top consulting firm in Germany to helping run a startup accelerator in Shanghai. Learn why he made the jump to China, the differences in venture capital and startup space in China compared to the US, what his plans are for the future, and the realities now with COVID-19 in Shanghai. Enjoy. All right, Kevin, thanks so much for joining the Wall Street Oasis podcast.
Thanks for having me, man.
So it'd be awesome if you could just give the listeners a short summary of your bio.
Yeah, sure. So I started studying in Germany at the University of Mannheim. What I studied there was business administration. And during my studies, I always positioned myself very broadly. So I was a total generalist. I looked into a law firm, into startup acceleration, into a startup, into SME consulting in India. And so it was all over the place. But for me, that was very much fun and I liked it. And after my studies, I had a quick placement at Rocket Internet for 3 months in Sydney. Before then, I transitioned into strategy consulting at Roland Berger for approximately 3 years. But the last half year of it, I was already focused on my own startup accelerator or funding accelerator, as we called it, in Berlin. Mm-hmm. Where we were getting pre-seed, very early stage startups in touch with the right investors, VCs and angels. Before then making the big move from Europe to China, Shanghai, where now I'm in charge of the accelerator. It's called, so the company is called X-Note. And we do 3 things. One is space, like WeWork, for example. The other thing is corporate innovation. So like, for example, McKinsey Digital would do, focused purely on innovation in China. Mm-hmm. And the third thing is acceleration business. And that's what I'm in charge of.
The acceleration business? What do you mean by that?
Exactly. So with the acceleration business, what we do is we do startup acceleration, mm-hmm. helping startups from outside of China get into China and mm-hmm. gain traction in China. And then there's multiple business models, how we monetize that.
And are most of your investments coming out of US, Europe, what companies are coming to you guys for help for that typically?
Mostly Asia and Europe. So with the US, historically, we have done very little, although it's still a spot on my map that I want to, engage more with in the future.
Great. So let's start back kind of in your university days and mm-hmm. tell me a little bit about why you went there, what your thought process was as you were going through. You said you kept everything very broad as a generalist. Was that because you figured it didn't matter to specialize, or you just found it you said you found it interesting, it was fun for you? So what kind of eventually, why did you take you said the first role out of school was Rocket Internet?
Exactly.
And but did you have internships during your 4 years? Is that traditional in Germany to have some work experience before you graduate?
Yeah, so the way it usually works in Germany is you during your studies, you develop a vision for where you want to go. Mm-hmm. So you do 1 or 2 or 3 internships there, and then you start as a full-time in that role. For me, I always knew going into university, I wanted to start my own business eventually. And so I figured the best way to learn as much as possible about business is to look into a lot of different companies from a lot of different industries. So I never started business administration studies and were like, okay, I need to get into investment banking, or I need to end up in private equity. It was always, the goal was to start a business, to change the world, and to truly have an impact. And so I did a lot of different things. I started interning at a small startup that was probably one of the internships where I learned the most. Then I worked for accelerators. Then I looked into a magic circle law firm. I was at the Federal Bank of Germany, and so on. Until then, the end of my studies approached, and I realized, oh, actually, you learned a lot of things during your studies, but it still feels super theoretical. Like most of the things you learned in accounting or in controlling or in finance, you're not really certain how to apply them.
Right.
And so I faced the decision between doing my master's degree, like 90% of my study mates did, or I figured I might try this thing called consulting that I got in touch with over the last couple of months, because the University of Mannheim is one of the target universities for consulting firms. So
but
they were doing recruiting.
Weren't you too late, or was this in your junior, like your third year, or was this when you kind of decided I might do this?
That was in my third year. Yeah.
Okay, so you still had time.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Okay.
So that was in my third year. And so I figured, okay, so either you do a master's degree or you do like a practical master, as I call it, which would be consulting, basically trying different industries, trying different functions, and just seeing how that works. And then I figured after a couple of years, I can make an exit and become my own boss.
Did you feel like there were enough engagements to actually get that broad of an education, or were you on like long-term engagements, or were you jumping around into enough industries where you felt like you got a pretty good experience?
Yeah, so myself, I did 12 projects in the 3 years. Yeah, so that was quite a good and healthy amount of projects.
Yeah, that's awesome. So, but what was this initial kind of when you first got out of school? So you got an internship in, was it at Roland, Berger?
No. So the way it worked then was once I finished my studies, I applied to a number of consulting firms. I was totally clueless, so I didn't really do a lot of research. For example, I totally skipped applying for Bain because I thought these guys, they are too focused on, they're too much into mathematical stuff, and I kind of found their website boring, so I figured, I'm not going to apply there. So,
so like financial engineering. Well, it sounds like you were the typical, arrogant 20-year-old like I was.
I was like, to be honest, I was pretty clueless, and that's of course also why I do right now the things I do on the side, right, with my YouTube channel and stuff.
Yeah, tell the listeners your YouTube channel because it's pretty popular. I think you're pretty well known. So why don't you tell people so they know where to check you out?
Yeah, sure. So I have a YouTube channel. It's called Management Consulting Insights. And I started it during my last year at Roland Berger, where I started with a couple of vlogs I recorded from a project in Paris. And people got interested, and they started asking questions. How does that work in consulting? What do you like about it? What do you hate about it? How do you get in there? And so I, started recording videos about that. And I'm publishing one every week. So you can find me on YouTube. If you type in Kevin John, I will pop up, or Management Consulting Insights.
Cool. And how did people? How did your boss and your company deal with the fact that you were developing this personality? Did they not care because it wasn't big enough yet, or when you started, or was it something that they talked to you about?
Yeah, at the beginning, of course, it wasn't big enough, but rather sooner than later, people found out, of course, and to be honest, most of the people took it pretty well, so most of them thought, hey, that's actually quite interesting. And I would say Roland Berger is one of the more, I would say they are more tolerant towards these kind of things.
That's great.
Whereas you have other firms where, any publicity is very strictly forbidden and controlled. So that was all right. Of course, you always need to, it's a professional context, so you need to be careful, and you can't show office from inside and all these kind of things.
Were they like warning you by the end, saying be careful and stuff like that, or was it something where you were, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so through the during progression of time, I had talks with people, and I just asked for myself, so what's allowed? I don't want to make any mistakes.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that I think that went pretty well. At the same time, of course, now that I'm totally free, I'm still even a bit more free to just say my opinion about anything.
Right.
But I would say, yeah, I was positively surprised of how well that went with the firm.
That's great. And so tell me a little bit about kind of this initial, so you were telling me about how you specifically kind of went to this how it works, and I think
Yeah, exactly.
go
So
ahead.
so I did all these internships, and then I decided, okay, I'm going to go for a practical master's degree,
Right.
which to me was consulting. And then I had 4 months left until I was supposed to start my consulting job, and I had very good contacts to Rocket Internet, and so I managed to secure it's called, I think, Global Venture Development Program traineeship at Rocket Internet. So I went to, usually that's a thing that lasts, I think, 9 months, and I said, sorry guys, I'm not available for 9 months, but I would love to help out for 3 months. Is that possible? And so that was possible. So I went to Sydney, which was like beautiful, perfect work-life balance.
Yeah.
Even though we worked hard, but on the weekends we had a lot of fun. But that also, then in that sense, it strengthened my ambition to get into consulting, because I realized that the startup world, and especially the way Rocket Internet runs their ventures, it's super chaotic and it's super fast. And I really appreciated, or I knew that it would be good to have a super strong understanding of all the fundamentals. And so I thought consulting must be a great place to learn that. I had a couple of good mentors at Rocket too, who worked at the top tier strategy consulting firms, because they do a lot of hiring from there.
Yep.
And so that just reinforced my decision to work in strategy consulting for a couple of years.
Yeah, and you were there for 3 years at Roland Berger. So why do you think you stayed so long? I think, is that typical, or is it usually 2 years and then kind of the next step?
I would say it's 2 to 3 years usually.
Yep.
And for me, it was, I always planned on staying 2 to 3 years. And then, of course, you can't really plan it up until the last months. Like, you get opportunities or you don't, and it takes a little bit longer. For me, the last half year, and that's also something where I'm thankful to the firm. I told them, hey guys, on the side, by the way, we're building this startup funding accelerator with a couple of friends. Can you guys give me a sabbatical? I would like to explore that opportunity. And surprisingly enough, they told me yes, like, that's possible, do your thing, and if it works, then scale it. If not, then come back. And
How
so
did you approach that conversation? Because that can be really touchy. Was it directly first with your manager saying, hey, I want to go do this startup, can I come back in 3 months? Wouldn't most places just tell you, like, no, you can't do that? Like, is that normal? Do you feel like that was just because you had developed strong relationships, or why do you think that was the case?
Yeah, definitely because of good relationships. So I was always trying to have good relationships with my mentors, and always, yeah. So it was really about keeping good relationships. I had multiple mentors within the firm, and with these mentors, I was very open, about my ambitions and my future goals. And I think that contributed to the fact that they then were also willing to give me this additional trust.
And so they kind of knew that it was just a few year, 2 to 3 year stint, and there wasn't any expectation that you would stay on and become a manager or an engagement manager and get promoted through with it. Is that typical for the firms there? Is it like, sometimes they go to business school, sometimes people go, what do people do coming out of?
I wouldn't say that I wouldn't say that you should clearly communicate that you are going to, leave the firm in 2 or 3 years.
Right.
But what I did, and what I was very open about, is my big ambitions to start a company, build an empire. And so they knew that, okay, so either this guy is going for the partner track, and then probably he realizes, oh, like that's not that's not really building or going to get him an empire, and then
Mm-hmm.
he jumps to something else, or he's naturally just going to leave in a couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
But basically being straightforward with your vision and your ambitions, that's something I think that's very beneficial.
Why do you think you have such big ambitions to build an empire, as you say? What does an empire look like to you?
Well, that's something I ask a lot of people. How do you develop ambitions? So to me, I haven't come up with a perfect answer so far. I know
What
that
about your
it's a lot.
parent? What about your parents?
Yeah, that's what I just wanted to say. I know it has a lot to do with how you grow up, and for me, certainly, my mom played a big role, talking about managers of Fortune 500 companies when I was barely 15. Um, but I'm oftentimes asking myself if that's not too easy, if there's not more. So that's
What did your mom do that she was talking about these leaders?
she was working at a law firm, but she was working on the BD side of a law firm, so the
Okay,
services.
very cool. And your father was, do you have a relationship with him? Are you close with him?
Yes, yes. My father is a general practitioner, so doctor.
Gotcha. Like my dad.
So he was always the one pulling me back and saying, Kevin, things like family, love, all of that is also important. And my mom was kind of uh, the total opposite, saying,
The
okay, like
driver.
go for the career, go for the,
That's cool.
yeah.
That's cool. So you kind of have this ambition of an empire. What's your vision of an empire? Does it matter what the business is in? Is it more about the size and the number of people you employ? Is it the revenue? Is it the profit? What do you view as kind of success kind of down the road? And
Patrick, ultimately, I think it's about influence.
mm-hmm.
And so if it's whether it's a firm with 50 people where you do highly important deals for states and governments, or whether it's a 50,000 people firm where you produce semiconductors or whatever the hell,
Yeah.
um, doesn't really matter. But I think this influence component is something that drives me. Now, should it be beneficial for the world? Of course, like you want to build a legacy, and you want to build a positive one. At least for me, that's the case. Um, so all of these are factors that make me wake up in the morning and be extremely driven and ambitious. I'm not a kind of person that has problems coming to work or working on Saturdays and Sundays. For me, that's actually fun in my current stage of life.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure it will change at some point, once you grow older, and maybe,
When you get a
other
little gray in the beard.
priorities shift.
Yeah.
You either exactly, or you manage to grow a beard in the first place. So
I have three young kids, 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 1-year-old, and they're all stuck at home because of the coronavirus or the COVID-19, however you want to call it. And so
yeah,
and so it's definitely priorities do change. I do remember probably being closer to your age when I was traveling the world, and I was at Rothschild in London,
yeah,
partying like crazy, having a great time, and then for the training, and then coming back to New York, it was a blast. But I feel like it's interesting because things do shift, and they shift kind of slowly at first, but then really fast, especially once you get married and you have kids. If you want that. So I know there's some people that have actually chosen very deliberately to be single and are happy with that decision. One of our top members actually on the site. So
yeah.
I'd love to just hear a little bit more about where you feel like you're able to build the most influence and what form that takes. And just as people think about influence, can you talk a little bit about how you're obviously building that through YouTube and media and all that stuff and through what you're doing there. But then also, do you feel like your connections into the accelerator and startup community that you're building now um, is going to be what's kind of the true driver towards that influence? Or do you feel like it's more you doing your own thing on the sides, like and just experimenting?
Yeah, no, me doing my own stuff on the side is really just experimenting, as you already pointed out. So for me, that's nothing that I see, as my long-term goal. I do think it's important to build reach and following online. So I do think in today's world, that's an asset, to have 5,000, 10,000, 50,000 people following you. But that being said, the main thing I think is, for me is interesting in terms of value generation going forward is bridging the gaps, the knowledge gaps between China and the rest of the world. So it's like there's a huge wall, a huge information asymmetry between China and the rest of the world, and I see my mission in taking a hammer and poking small holes into that wall, and then slowly increasing the holes. And so there's lots of potential there. Although many people think that China is opening up much more and free flow of goods and information, but the reality is the information asymmetry is still super high. And every day I stay longer in China, I realize now that I'm interacting, for example, with the Shanghai government or with other high-ranking Chinese government officials, I just realize what a different world that is, and how much of potential there lies in connecting, for example, China and Europe or China and the US more. And for me, the thing that I'm interested in is, startups. So for me, it's about the startup ecosystem, and specifically focusing on building bridges for the startup ecosystems in China and the rest of the world.
Can you talk to me a little bit about how the differences between like a Silicon Valley where I'm at right here and
Yep.
the startup community in China? I'm super fascinated to hear if you have an opinion on what the main differences are. I mean, is it such that here where the VCs do VCs play a huge role in China, or is it other influencers or other like are there more accelerators? Do you know kind of the differences between both cultures?
Yes. So there's a couple of differences. I would say the first one is just the sheer scale of resources. I mean, China, just as a country, is so much bigger, so much more people, so much more money to deploy. So that's the first difference. Secondly, the role of the
When you say
government.
money to deploy, you mean just just investments in general, just pure capital, like chasing these deals?
Exactly, pure
Okay.
capital. I mean,
Yep.
total amount of venture capital went down, obviously, over the last quarters.
Yep.
Um, however, the money in the system in general, and I think the reason why it went down is because it was just too hot. I mean, there was just the VC scene in China is a very young one. They are not super experienced. Deals are pretty straightforward, and you don't have different kinds of contracts and participation schemes as you have in the US. Um, and so they still have a lot to learn. And now it's the first time that kind of this market cooled down a little bit, which I do
Yeah, yeah.
think is
Which is
healthy.
needed. Which is needed. Yeah.
Exactly.
hmm
So that's the one thing, the sheer scale of resources. The second thing is obviously the role the government plays, because here you have an authoritarian capitalism as opposed to what we have in the West. So you need to always take the government into account, especially if you plan to build an empire. If you don't plan to stay small and in a niche. The third thing is the mindset of the typical Chinese consumer. The Chinese consumer is very open to giving away their privacy, their data. So they don't care whether you take their data as long as some benefits arise from that. So if you do a survey in Germany, it's like 10% of people are willing to give away their data if they get some benefit from it. Here it's like it's the majority. People just don't care.
95%. Yeah, or so. Yeah.
And so so that's another thing. And then maybe the fourth thing to close with is, based on these three factors, things like lean startup or things like design sprints and methodologies that came from the West, and people try to adopt them in China, they usually don't work. Even things like, in the West, you always say you need to pick like a niche, you need to pick one narrow vertical and conquer that one and then go on to the next one. Even things like that are not totally applicable. You have many cases of startups and companies here that go super broad in the beginning and manage to conquer multiple verticals at the same time and somehow manage to create synergies between those. So it's a very different ecosystem.
Yeah, I wonder. And so in terms of accelerators and VC funds, and are there traditional funds like you have here in the US in terms of limited partners, the LP GP structure? Are there similar things in China that are where there's these massive VC funds with 10 billion equivalent of USD that go out and make 100 investments across SaaS software, for example? Is it similar in that sense?
Yeah, I would point out three main differences because the most things are similar, but some things are different. So it's a little bit faster. So that means the general, like the duration of a fund will usually not be 10 years, but might be shorter, 6-7 years.
Okay.
That's normal for Chinese VC funds. Second thing is you always have RMB funds and you have USD funds. And that's important to know for founders from abroad who seek to get funding, is if the VC firm you're talking to only has an RMB fund, then it might actually be pretty difficult for them to give you funding because they need to go through a lot of legal loopholes to give you that money. However, it's much easier if they have a USD fund.
Interesting.
That's the second thing.
They can raise in two denominations, basically, in the currency, and it's helpful if you're an outsider kind of coming in. Okay, so that's interesting. Okay, and then sorry, your last difference.
Exactly, and then the last difference is you have if you talk to people at VC firms, some of them might be called investment manager, or so let's pick an investment manager, for example. In reality, they are not. In reality, they are probably on the associate level. But in China, talking about those roles, you can kind of always deduct one position. So I have some friends from startup founders who approach VC firms. And are you still there?
Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you.
We lost you for a second, but yeah, I heard everything. So you were saying basically you have to deduct two positions for roles, and so somebody's a manager.
Yeah, basically deduct one position. So I have friends who are founders and who have been in touch with investment managers, and they think, this guy has decision competence, like he has decision power, but in fact, he or she is just the one, doing the screening. So that's something sometimes disappointing to people talking to Chinese VC firms.
Interesting. Okay, that's great to know. And so tell me a little bit about if there's people that are interested in moving to China like you did and moving to you're in Shanghai, correct?
Yes, Shanghai.
So either moving to Shanghai or moving to China for opportunities. Where do you think the best places to be are in terms of city, in terms of specific, obviously you might be biased with being in an accelerator, but are there other opportunities you see? Like if somebody wanted to say, stay with a large consulting firm and come to China, is that an option? What are the options for people outside of China that want to kind of go there and they see such big opportunity?
Yeah. So geographically, so we can answer in terms of geographies and in terms of industries. I think in terms of geographies, it's really just the three tier 1 cities, Shenzhen, Beijing, and Shanghai, that are interesting most of the times, because smaller cities are much less international than the big cities. And among those three big cities, it's really Shanghai that's the most international one. So me coming from Shanghai to Beijing, I already feel, wow, that's much more Chinese than what I'm used to in Shanghai. And that's something you need to take into account. In terms of industry, to be honest, without speaking Chinese, it's super hard. So if you want to join any consulting firm without speaking Chinese, you have two options: either forget about it, or you are senior enough, so you have done like 3, 4, 5 years at a consulting firm, and then you make a transition, and then what happens is they will give you someone who translates for you. And that means your seniority must be high enough, and your expertise in a certain area needs to be high enough in order for that to justify them giving you a translator.
It's interesting. So it's pretty rare. You got to be pretty senior, pretty valuable. So tell me a little bit about specifics around. So you said you have to know Chinese. So basically, that's, I assume, mostly native, if not basically fully fluent, like business fluent at least.
Exactly. So it's really you really need to be pretty fluent. Otherwise, especially business Chinese is a
Are
whole.
you yourself fluent?
No, I'm not.
Okay. And so you're okay because you're dealing with people trying to come in, which the majority speak English, I assume.
Exactly. So that's the loophole. Yeah. One of 10 positions you find are positions where it's not really required to speak Chinese, and those are mostly, positions that are outward facing, so communicating with the outside world.
Mm-hmm.
And for me, that's the case. I mean, for 90% of my job, when I talk to the Singaporean government, when I talk to startups in Berlin, and so on, I don't need to speak Chinese. Mm-hmm. Then, of course, there's these 10% where we talk to the Chinese government, for example, where it would be nice for me to be fluent and speak perfect Chinese. But then again, Patrick, that's a challenge that takes probably 5 years to master.
And are you going to try to master it? What's the plan for you? Are you going to be in Shanghai for 5 years, 2 years? What do you have a roadmap for yourself at all, or is it just as long as you're seeing good opportunities and the business is doing well, you'll stay?
So I have a couple of in Germany you say you have irons in the fire,
Yeah.
So they are hot now, and you need to
do the work.
Do the work. And so until these irons are finished, I will not leave.
Mm-hmm.
That will probably take, I don't know, 1, 2, 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And once I'm done with these irons, I can then decide, do I see bigger opportunities now with my new background, my new experience outside? So maybe as someone who connects China and the rest of the world from outside of China, which would be possible. Or do I see great opportunities within China there, and then I'll stay? And that being said, what I do right now is I do practice Chinese every day, try to get better at it. But I'm also realistic and know that, I have super high, I work a lot, and some people really dedicate the full day to learning Chinese. So I'm definitely progressing slower than some of my peers.
That's fair. So how did you even come up, or how did, coming out of consulting, how did you even find this opportunity? And tell me a little bit about how you found yourself in Shanghai. Was it something you were actually seeking, or was it something where this opportunity presented itself through your network? And talk to me a little bit about that, because I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So growing up, my best childhood friend was Chinese. So that was the first time I got in touch with the Chinese culture. I liked it. And once I turned 16, I realized, China actually is also interesting economically. So there's something to do there in terms of business.
Mm-hmm.
So very early on, I formed the vision that I wanted to make a career in China, at least for a couple of years, because I thought, it's something that can only have a strong upside. And so after finishing my consulting years, I thought, okay, so either you do it now or you'll probably do it never, because then you grow older, and as you already said, Patrick, you start maybe have a girlfriend, and all these things start, and it gets super difficult to say, hey, let's move to China. And so for me, I decided to make the move. How did I do it? Or what would I tell people who try to do it themselves? You really need to go the networking route, because if you go the official sending an application through the website route, first of all, what you'll find is mostly, like teacher gigs. So you're not going to find a lot of finance jobs or finance consulting, whatever you're aiming for. And secondly, if you find some of these, what happens is, these people, they get 50 applications by Chinese people, and then they get this one application from you, written in English, and they will be a bit confused at first, even if it's a position that where you can speak English. So I would say it's much better to, in a country like China, where it's all about networking, all about building those strong bonds, to approach people personally. How would I do it, or how did I do it? I went through LinkedIn. I reached out to a lot of people.
How did you do your filters? Like, what were you looking for? Obviously location, but what else were you looking for? You knew you wanted to be in the startup space, or no?
Yeah, I was purely looking for people in the startup space.
Mm-hmm.
And I supplemented that with real life offline experience. I actually did multiple trips to Shanghai. And I remember one trip where I was here for 2 weeks, and every day was full of coffee dates with different potential leads, or business partners. And so
it's the same. It sounds exactly the same as the US.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And networking is universal. That's the lesson here.
Exactly.
Yeah. So just building relationships. Yep. Okay. So yes, you came for 2 weeks and you didn't have a job, or this is on your savings basically. And you're just.
Yeah, I know that was during the time when I was working at Roland Berger. So I took 2 weeks holidays and went over.
Wow. So that was your holiday, just coming in Shanghai and having coffee chats with people all day.
Exactly.
You might actually build your empire with that attitude. Okay. So you were meeting with people. Tell me what those meetings were like. I think that's pretty interesting. Was it a bunch of people who were only people in the startup space were like from Germany mostly? Was it people from all around Europe? Tell me like who you were getting actually success at actually even scheduling a meeting.
Yeah. In general, I would say 2 types of people. Mm-hmm. Firstly, Germans. Secondly, foreigners in general. So with Germans, of course, it's easy for me coming from Germany, texting them and being like, hey, you did exactly what I also want to do. Coming from Germany to China would be great to exchange some thoughts. And these people immediately get this kind of mentor instinct, wow, I can help this guy. Mm-hmm. And feel good about.
Were they in startups and VC funds and that type of stuff mostly?
Mostly that stuff. Accelerators, startups, innovation companies, head of innovation at company X.
Got it. Okay, cool.
Things like that.
Yep.
And so that was the one thing. And then foreigner versus Chinese. Also here, I mean, just us being foreigners or being people from the West, we have a very, we just bond better with other foreigners. Mm-hmm. So my success rate with contacting foreigners who lived in Shanghai, expats, was much higher than contacting Chinese people. Even though I met some wonderful, a couple of people running big VC funds, Chinese people who were also willing to meet up with me and talk about opportunities. But of course, these people then also spoke fluent English. So that was the situation.
Got it. And so tell me about the actual meeting that kind of was your breakthrough. Was that during those 2 weeks, that one of those? So how many meetings did you have per day on average? You say 5, 3?
Like 3 meetings.
3 meetings per day, and it was across 2 weeks, so like 15, a little bit more, I guess, but 20
Yeah,
plus
it was
30.
20 plus
It's really
20
good.
plus meetings, I would say. And funnily enough, so this one networking trip wasn't where I found my current job or my current occupation.
Mm-hmm.
Nevertheless, many of the people I met that time I stayed in touch with, and I also did that, I think, 1.5 or 2 years in advance of me making the transition to actually go to Shanghai. So I
Okay.
had the time to build up the relationship and make it a genuine one. But what led to my current position is I found the founder of Xnode through our alumni system. So he actually was a Roland Berger alumni,
Okay.
like 15 or 20 years ago. Then he went into real estate, which is where there's lots of money in China.
Mm-hmm.
And then he thought about, what should I do next instead of retiring? Okay, let me start an innovation company. And it was him who I got in touch with through LinkedIn, and he then agreed to work together.
Great. And so did you meet him in person first in Shanghai, or?
Yeah, so we got in touch through LinkedIn and then agreed to have a meeting in Shanghai. And so I basically came to Shanghai without having anything. Like, I had a couple of leads,
Mm-hmm.
also some of the people I met during my 2 weeks
Right.
networking in Shanghai.
Yep.
But I didn't have any security. I didn't know what's going to happen. And my backup plan actually was to go to Hong Kong. So I knew I had 3 months of time to find something in Shanghai, to make
Yep.
something happen. And then I figured, if that doesn't work, I'll go to Hong Kong and try over there. And if that doesn't work, maybe I'll go to Singapore. And then if that doesn't work, I'm probably not
Is
able to
there
find
is there a
anything.
reason you wanted Shanghai over Hong Kong? And Hong Kong probably a little more of a financial hub, right, than Shanghai.
Yeah, and Hong Kong, and I
A little
always
more
had that
Western.
China vision, right?
Yeah.
And Hong Kong is not really China.
Right.
It's like the people are so different. Um, and I just found Shanghai to be even a bit more exciting.
Okay. Fair. So you did meet him. Luckily, it worked out. Tell me about kind of what you went into that meeting with, in terms of like perspective, in terms of like did you have a set thing, like I need to get paid this much or anything like that, or was it more like, hey, I'll work for cheap? Did you have a certain negotiation going in? Did you feel like you had the job lined up, or was it more just still kind of in the initial phases?
Yeah, so I had two main thoughts. The first one was the salary really for me isn't a decision factor, because whether I earn 3K, 5K, or 10K per month, this doesn't this will not get me into a different lifestyle. It's not
Mhm.
like I'm going to buy yachts and properties all around the world if I earn 5K more per month.
Right.
I'm going to be able to invest a little bit more, and that's nice, but that was never the driving decision factor. The second thing for me was, I do want to have the possibility to, based on this job, have some exponential benefits from it, and ideally monetary benefits. So of course there was the discussion around, what do we do if new deals turn up? Can I be somehow become a shareholder if
Hmm.
we start a new joint venture, which is surprisingly enough something you do rather often here when you make deals with big, for example, real estate, state-owned enterprises, and so on. So, what are the options for me to then participate in these kind of things? And so, those were the two things that guide me. And above that, to
Hmm.
be honest, I was playing it cool externally, but internally, I was just looking for anything. So I probably would have, this was, looking back, this was the perfect, or this is the perfect company for me, the perfect opportunity, and I'm able to take so much responsibility, lead a team, start a VC fund, crazy things. But I probably would have accepted anything when I came here, you know.
And are your investors kind of already lined up, or do you guys already have the fund lined up? And or is it more like you guys are providing the expertise and people are the startups paying you like a consulting fee and then giving you a piece of equity to help you grow into China?
Yeah, so currently we have two things that we do. The first one, we have done that for a long time before I came, is just we provide a startup acceleration program and startups pay a flat fee. They don't give away any equity. And what we do with this one is, for example, we do it with a lot of governments, because startups usually are not able to pay 25K for a startup program. So the governments will pay for the startups. And that is a nice model, but of course it's not exponential at all. And so the second model that actually was my duty coming here to introduce that and take this whole acceleration practice to the next level is equity. So we started now taking equity in selected startups that, after landing in China and staying here for 2 months, find initial traction. And so what we do is we install people who will do operational work on the ground, install them in their teams, and for that we take a certain equity share. And the second thing is we are in the process of raising an actual fund. That's very much my goal. We have been in touch with a number of private equity players who were interested in investing in the fund. We have a lot of corporates who could be LPs potentially, but as you can imagine, those talks came to a halt a couple of months ago. But it's something we're picking up again, and that's probably one of the irons I talked about for me to finish that, and that will be a great learning experience.
For sure. Tell me a little bit about what the climate is like now in Shanghai, given that it sounds like things are a little bit more under control with COVID there, COVID-19. So tell me a little bit about, are things back to normal? Are things kind of half normal? What's going on? And what could we expect in the US, do you think, you've learned there?
So two things. Let's start on the personal side, some things that I see personally, and then we can talk a little bit about business.
Sure.
So personally, it's almost totally back to normal, except for two things. Still, everybody's wearing face masks, so I have mine lying around here, and you have temperature controls at every building, basically, like my home, our office, malls, everywhere. Except for that, bars are opened again. People go for parties, for drinks. They go to restaurants. They go to the gym. They are outside having fun.
Okay.
So in terms of, personal impressions, that's what's going on. In terms of business, we still, of course, feel heavy impact. Especially cross-border startup acceleration. You can imagine that even if China is back to perfect normal health, like there's nothing going on, because you can't have any startups from Germany or from France, Italy, Australia, wherever they come from, coming into China. They just have different problems right now. So that's heavily affected. On the other side, we're quite lucky to have this corporate innovation business. So we still are able to sell projects to some corporates, to some state-owned enterprises, and that keeps us very much alive. On the other hand, also for startup acceleration, we do, as I told you, work together with governments, and these governments right now, even though, yes, they do have other problems now too due to COVID-19, but we still have a couple of well-paying government clients who want to send startups over to China, or engage in things like, online acceleration programs, virtual expert calls and things like that. So overall, to sum it up, it's going okay. Could definitely be better. We're impacted, but we're not going to die.
Yeah. Well, that's good. It's good to hear. Is it been a little bit of a, how do you think in terms of the trend, has it been where you said everyone's wearing masks? Are people still wearing masks? I know it's people culturally for wear masks for pollution usually, right? In certain cities, anyways. So has that transition been more natural? And do you feel like at the bars, are people like taking off their masks and like congregating in small spaces still? And it's not a concern?
So at the beginning, it was like people were definitely wearing masks all the time. Even in restaurants, they tried to wear the mask and just
And
take them off to put
eat.
something in their mouth.
Mm-hmm.
Now it's still people are wearing masks all the time, but for example, if they go to the gym, they will take it off to do their exercises.
Yeah.
And so now the situation is relaxed a little bit, but Chinese people are, they are great executioners. So if you tell them something, they will do it and they will stick to it. And so there is very high discipline in terms of wearing masks on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
I do think that's healthy right now, because you never know whether there could be, a second wave or things like that.
Yeah.
So for now, let's stay cautious. That's what I observe around.
Yeah, things are pretty bad here. I think New York especially is getting hit.
And I see an interesting dynamic that, from what I know in Germany, is people are not wearing masks, mostly because there's just not enough masks, because all of them are being produced in China. And so in Germany, it's like if you wear a mask, it's considered almost rude, because you're taking away masks from
Hospital.
medical personnel, like
Yeah.
people, doctors, nurses. They need those masks, and why are you wearing the mask,
Yeah.
whereas here in China, it's considered rude if you don't wear a mask, because people actually wear a mask to protect you, not
You.
themselves, right?
Right.
And that's something people sometimes get wrong also on a daily basis. Like 1 year ago when I arrived here, one of my colleagues from my team got sick, so suddenly they turned up in the office wearing a mask, and I'm like, that's strange, but it was actually to protect me from becoming ill.
Right. It's interesting. Yeah, culturally it's very different. I think it's going to be hard to get, at least in the US, it's going to be hard to get wide scale mask wearing for any period of time. So it'll be interesting to see if we suffer kind of higher rates of contagion for longer. I hope not. We've been pretty aggressive, at least here in California, with the social distancing.
Mm-hmm.
Things have been locked down for a good 3 weeks now, where even
Yeah.
even the playgrounds are blocked off, and so we have nowhere to go. Like with the kids is crazy right now. When they block the playgrounds off, I'm like, okay, this is getting pretty draconian. But
Yeah, man.
yeah, I'm hoping like the graphs start looking better over the next week or two. But yeah, it's been just surreal. It's almost like out of a movie. But I hope
Yeah.
hopefully we can all stay healthy. Any last thoughts before we call it, of advice you'd give to your younger self, or advice you want to give to younger listeners, that you.
No, so far I think I'd be good. We talked about a lot of cool things.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. And then yeah, I guess in terms of where people can find you again, why don't you remind the listeners again where they can find you? And I'll link
Yeah,
to
so
it in the show notes as well.
people can find me on YouTube and on Instagram and on LinkedIn. So YouTube, it is Management Consulting Insights, or simply look for Kevin John, Jon. For Instagram, it's the Kevin John, so THE Kevin Jon. And for LinkedIn, I guess we can just link to it in the show notes.
Perfect.
It's Kevin Johannes Werner, my German real name.
Sounds great. Well, Kevin, thanks so much for taking the time out of your day to share your story and some insight and some wisdom.
Yeah, it was super interesting. Thanks for having me, Patrick.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, patrick@wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.